Why don't we lose weight in Ramadan? And if we do lose weight in Ramadan, why is it that we are likely to regain it back shortly after the month has concluded? How is it that we could spend hours every single day for 29 or 30 days and not experience either short-term weight loss or long-term weight loss? My name is Farouk Masihuddin, aka Muslim Money Guy, and I usually talk about personal finance for Muslims, but this video is not about money. Instead, it's about a different type of mental accounting that we do while we're fasting. I have a particular interest in this topic because it happens to be the month of Ramadan, and I've been listening to a lot of conversations both online and offline about why it is that during the month of Ramadan, many of us don't lose very much weight, or in some cases, why some of us might even gain weight during this month. I've been fasting during the month of Ramadan for as long as I can remember because I was born Muslim, and fasting during other times during the Islamic calendar. But also I have done a whole bunch of extended fasting, and it was through extended fasting that I lost a significant amount of weight and have maintained roughly around that range for the last few years. I'm not a doctor, nor am I a dietitian. I'm just a guy who spent a lot of time working through some of these questions because I had them myself. The first thing to note about this whole weight loss in Ramadan thing is that weight loss is not the point of Ramadan, is not the point of fasting, as we are reminded in the Quran that fasting in this month is to grow in God consciousness, to grow in taqwa, and it's important to put that front and center. But asking the question about why we don't lose weight during Ramadan, or why we regain the weight that we do lose in the month so quickly thereafter, is an important question because it reveals a type of mental accounting that we do with food and that we do with fasting in particular. And it can hopefully help us behave in ways that are more aligned with our higher principles in the month and outside of the month. Before we get into the answer about why we don't lose weight during the month of Ramadan, let's go over some basics of food math. Food, as you probably know, is measured through calories. Calories are simply a measure of energy that food contains, and calories are to food what dollars are in personal finance. It's important to note that just as with personal finance, dollars are not the only thing in the picture. Dollars are part of the picture. Some basic arithmetic and basic simple elementary math is part of the picture, and that's also true with nutrition. Calories aren't the only thing in the picture, but they are part of it. It's important to note that calories do count. So when we experience food, we often just think about what we're consuming and whether or not we enjoy it. But for the purposes of answering the question that we have to think about food through the lens of calories. We have to think about how there's a numeric value attached to the food that we're consuming, and the way that that's measured is through this unit of energy called a calorie. And we have within us a capacity to burn calories, to use the energy that we consume for various bodily functions, for physical activity, and just for living itself. All of that requires energy, and the food that we consume provides the energy that we need to survive. But if we overconsume on calories, our body responds by storing the excess energy in fat. And up until now, you're probably thinking, thank you very much, Captain Obvious. There isn't very much there that helps answer the question, why don't we lose weight during the month of Ramadan? But there are a couple things to note here. The first thing to note is that it's very difficult to get an accurate picture of how many calories we consume, because very few of us only consume things that have been measured for the amount of energy that is contained within them. If you eat homemade meals, it's very difficult to measure and track exactly how many calories you're consuming when you grab a plate of rice and maybe a side dish and maybe some salad, and there's been a whole bunch of ingredients mixed in there. It's very difficult to determine exactly how many calories we're consuming meal by meal, day by day. And the other thing is that it's very difficult to get a precise measure of the number of calories that we are burning in a single day, also known as your total daily energy expenditure. It's very difficult to get that number because there are a number of factors that lead to that total number. Our genetics, which have an impact on our basal metabolic rate, the amount of physical activity that we're doing, the amount of non-intentional physical activity that we are doing, what's known as the thermic effect of food, how much calories it takes to burn the food that we're eating. All of those things combined together make it very difficult to figure out how many calories we are burning on a day-to-day basis. The second thing to note when it comes to food math is that timeframes matter. In personal finance, when we think about timeframes, we often think about the monthly because that's usually when most people are paid. That's usually when bills come out, is on a month-to-month basis. With food math, people will often think about calories on a day-to-day basis, 2,500 calories, for instance. And that's reasonable, but the thing about that is that we often eat on weekly cycles. Our eating on Saturday and Sunday are often very different than Monday to Friday because many of us are at work during those days. And so it ends up being a little bit more helpful to measure calories on a week-to-week basis rather than a day-to-day basis. So now let's go back to this question. Why don't we lose weight in Ramadan? And the answer to this question is this thing called compensatory eating back calories missed during fasting. We go through hours upon hours of not eating or drinking anything, and we have spent hours in a fasted state without any calories consumed, and it's not uncommon for us to consume back those calories in the window that remains. And this can happen either intentionally or unintentionally, and it can happen on a daily, weekly, and monthly time frame. Let's take a look at how this manifests on the daily and the weekly timeframes. The daily eat back is the potential to eat back the calories that we miss during the day in suhoor and iftar. So if you have 2,500 calories consumed on a non-Ramadan day, and that's split not evenly, but it's split across the day, sort of sprinkled across between breakfast, lunch, dinner, and maybe dessert or a snack at the end of the night. Those calories can be consumed, all 2,500 of them can be consumed with a more calorically rich suhoor and a more calorically rich iftar. And this is not difficult to do, especially during Ramadan, when many of the foods that are available to us are very rich in calories. Deep fried foods, for example, are twice as calorically expensive than its baked equivalent. And lots of deep fried foods means that there's more opportunity to make up that calorie differential from fasting during the day. Lots of sweets, lots of rich foods that are customary to be made during the month of Ramadan make it easy to make back the calories that we are not eating during the day. This is what I call the daily eat back. And there are even more subtle ways that we can make back those calories. This image is from the fitness chef on Instagram, and it shows how just a slight difference in the amount of peanut butter that we put on toast can have a significant impact on the amount of calories that are being consumed just by how much we're spreading on the toast. The second time frame that we need to think about when we are thinking about compensatory eating, or this propensity for us to eat back the calories that we did not consume during the day, is on the week. It's not uncommon for our weekdays to look different than our weekends in the month of Ramadan. Weekends are often times where we are invited over to other people's homes for iftar, or we might invite others to our home for iftar. And the types of food that we eat, maybe even the amount that we consume on weekends, will look different often than what we consume on weekdays. And that makes a difference. Let's work with this 2,500 calories a day figure. Stretch that out over a week. That's 17,500 calories. And imagine that over 4 days, you are maybe even a little bit conservative. You don't overconsume Monday to Thursday, but on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you have some invitations, maybe you're hosting people, and you overconsume. Not by eating twice as much of the food that you normally eat, by eating significantly more than you eat normally during the week. That ends up being 17,500 calories consumed. And so it's not too difficult to make back the calories that we don't consume during the week on weekends. Now let's go back to this question that we began the video with. Why don't we lose weight in Ramadan? The answer in part seems to be because we simply consume the right amount of calories to maintain the weight. And that can happen either on the daily by consuming a few more calories at suhoor and at iftar, and maybe later in the evening. It can happen on the weekly by consuming a little bit more on the weekends. And if we happen to lose weight during the month of Ramadan, it can happen on the month to month. And so the amount of calories that we consume in Shawwal, the month after Ramadan, might be just enough to bring us back to that standard weight that we were prior to the month beginning. And so given that we do this type of compensatory eating back the calories that we don't consume during the day in Ramadan. And we do a type of mental accounting to adjust for the calories that we don't consume during the day in Ramadan. Now what? What do we do with this information? Especially if we're trying to maybe lose weight, or if we're trying to maintain the weight that we're at and not overindulge outside of the fasting window. I think the first thing to note is that we should prioritize process goals over outcome goals. What that means is not just pursuing outcomes related to food during the month of Ramadan. So maybe it's to lose or maintain one's weight, or maybe it's to think less about food, or to develop a more healthy relationship with food. All of those are perfectly reasonable outcomes to pursue during the month of Ramadan, because our relationship with food is front and center in the month as we're pursuing growing in taqwa. Those are fine outcomes, but it might be a little bit more beneficial to instead think a little bit more about how we're going to pursue that. I know that for myself, the way that I consume the food that I'm eating at iftar or during suhoor or on weekends when I'm invited out or I have people over at the house whom I'm enjoying my iftar with matters quite a bit. And so the process goals that I'm setting for myself might seem a little strange, but I think they will help me pursue some of the outcome goals that I've set for myself. The first is to chew twice as long as I normally chew. That might seem like a strange process goal to have, but I'm a fast eater on normal days, and during the month of Ramadan, especially during iftar, I become very, very quick through my meals. And by eating very quickly, I end up missing the satiety cues that I would notice if I were a little bit slower with my eating. So chewing twice as much will allow me to sense how full I am along the way. On a day-to-day basis, I'm going to prioritize protein, veggies, and water, and I'm going to try my best on a day-to-day basis to stop eating while I still have room in my stomach, in pursuit of the standard set by the Prophet ﷺ to eat until there's 1/3 air remaining in one's stomach. In other words, eat while there's still room for more. And then on a weekly basis, I'm going to remind myself that the weekend iftars are just the same as weekday iftars. It's not a ticket or a blank check to go out and consume without following the rules that I've set for myself on the day-to-day basis. Those are my process goals on the daily and weekly timeframes for this month. Do you have process goals for yourself? If so, let me know in the comments. And let's remember that while this is all interesting and important to think about, at least for a moment, the main point of Ramadan is to grow in taqwa. And so we ask that Allah Ta'ala make this intentionality around our relationship with food a means to growing in connection to Him and growing closer to Him.